there are some politicians definitely who make loose statements, irresponsible statements. I mean, you are exposed to so many opportunities. You are exposed to highest quality of management, which give you a lot of incentives and which carry out, mercenary assignments in a number of countries. And if you take a wrong decision, it can have catastrophic effect.
So welcome to One Young India, and today we'll be having a conversation with retired Major General Jai Yadav. He's been in the army since the last 35 odd years, and he served in the army for more than 35 odd years, and right now he's been serving as a consultant with USI, and he is also a visiting faculty at a number of distinguished defense institutions. And we're very fortunate to have him talk to the larger One Young India community today. He's been a part of the One Young India community since the last 2.5 odd years, and he has spoken to our students through our workshops. But today we'll be having a very candid conversation about what it means to be an army officer in India, where really is India heading when it comes to defending our position in the changing geopolitical space, and a lot more. So good morning, sir.
Good morning, Swagat.
Sir, so we are here today to discuss a lot about what's been happening in India. We've been seeing so many things, so many changes that have happened within the Indian political setup in the last 10 odd years, that the youth today thinks that there is a different narrative that is being built around what it means to be Indian. We also see at the same time that India's economy is growing. India's population is growing. And I think we are due to become the most populated country by April 2024 or 23, if I'm not wrong, sooner than later. And that said, there are ambitions from young Indians as what it means to be an Indian who can make their way into this wild world and, this immensely connected world. So I want to be first of all asking you, what do you think about what it means to be a millennial Indian today? And what advice would you first of all be giving to young Indians who are aspiring to make their mark in this ever-changing world?
Right. Thank you, Swagat, for giving me this opportunity to speak to so many young Indians. You have tremendous reach through this platform. So it's a great pleasure to be associated with you. Yeah, as regards your question, you're right. We are in a very, very challenging time. And I see it as a great opportunity for young Indians. Some of the major challenges, as you can see, that we have a economic slowdown, triggered by firstly the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown, and then of course we also have a part of the world in turmoil when we have a conflict raging. With no definite timelines for its ending. So it has really caused a lot of turmoil. The oil prices have gone up. The economies are slowing down. So these are the challenges we got to live with, and I think in the foreseeable future they will persist and we have to navigate through them. Having said that, it's also a great opportunity for a country like India. With a sizable young population, we are also experiencing a demographic dividend. We have a large pool of talent, and the whole world needs technical expertise and talent, which India is ready to provide. We've had a record number of startups, and they are doing well. However, as I said, a slightly difficult time. We have to remain focused and we have to see that the economy comes back, to its self before, as it was before the COVID-19 struck us. So these are the challenges, and I see that we are in a very good time at the moment in terms of how well positioned we are to exploit the current situation. So I'm very optimistic about this.
So you mentioned demographic dividend. Although I've been talking to a lot of people, they say that it does not take a lot for demographic dividend to turn into a demographic disaster. Do you think we are headed that way, or is the government doing enough to make sure that we don't turn into a demographic disaster?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If we don't take adequate measures to train our people, impart skills needed to find employment, to be suitable for the emerging economy, obviously it leads to frustration, it leads to social disorder, and serious social problems can occur, which can lead to disaster. But I think we are well aware of our strengths and weaknesses. And as I see, government is seized of the fact that we got to make best use of this opportunity which is coming our way. And you find a large number of programs and schemes have come up basically to generate and create a large pool of skilled people. And also we are in the process of entering into several trade agreements bilaterally with some of the countries we've already done, and others we are in the process of negotiating. And the basic idea is to expand our trade and commerce across the world to various other countries.
All right. So we tend to definitely gain, condition being that we are ready for that. And also, I really mean to ask you this. So you've been in the army for around 37 odd years. You've served with the United Nations. You're also right now consulting with a number of private companies. You're evaluating, n number of corporates and so on and so forth. Where do you see, the Indian military? So first of all, even before that, I want to ask you, what inspired you to join the Indian military?
Yeah, part of the reason was that it ran in the family. My father too was in the army, and growing up, you see a lot of things which become part of your DNA, and which the option comes to you naturally. And then I was very good at outdoors, and having done my college, I was fascinated by the way the army functioned. So those were the primary reasons which inspired me to join the army.
So you've spent your entire life in the army, and now that you're retired, and you've been spending a lot of time in the civilian, amongst the civilians. How different do you think it is to live, in a civilian life than in a military life?
Yeah, I think it's not easy initially when you come out from a very regimented sort of environment, I would say, to an environment which is very different. But then you quickly adopt and get used to the life which I think which is outside. Because there's a different value system within the defense forces, particularly in the army, and you learn to sort of live with that. So initially it is, yes, but after that I think it becomes a part of your life, and you get used to it.
But do you think it's really necessary for young people like us, or in fact, I really believe that anyone who is keen on learning stays young, and as Einstein used to say that anyone who is wanting to learn is young, whether at 20 or 80. But that said, I really feel that it's necessary for people to be regimented. But unfortunately, right now with the flexibility that we have with an online system going on, I don't see a lot of that happening. Right? We see so many young people working late at night, and we've recently seen that Indians have been told that they are very prone to having heart attacks. I feel that that's again my personal opinion. that is really necessary to have a regimented life, and I really wish that I had the opportunity to probably lead a formal lifestyle that way. But I feel, that said, I think that it's necessary that we have and lead a regimented lifestyle. But do you think, do you have some suggestions for young Indians to live a life like that?
Yeah, regimented does not have, it should not have negative connotations. A lot of people would probably interpret regimentation as something very controlled, something bound by things. No, mind should always be free, only then it can, be most fertile. So, and there should be a learning environment, which always is the best option. However, regimentation or regimented life would definitely include certain amount of discipline, which of course pays immense, benefits. It has in terms of timings, in terms of meeting your commitments, in terms of achieving goals, remaining focused on certain issues. You see, quite often you find that when there is a catastrophe or when there is an emergent situation, the government or the organizations fall back upon the army, whether a child is to be taken out from a bore well or there is a catastrophic flood or a similar situation. That's not the primary role of the army, but it is its dependability and its ability to achieve certain goals in given times that has always, stood it apart from the other organizations. If you recall, when we have to organize something at the national level like Commonwealth Games, so the army chipped in with its great sense of, devotion to the duty and also commitment to the goals. So those are the parts definitely one would be very happy if they could be incorporated in our civil lives. Those are the things which could be inculcated among the young people. They always pay results.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. So, like you mentioned, I see army playing a very significant role within the Indian setup. But at the same time, when we consider our neighbors, like we consider Pakistan and we consider Myanmar, there's always been an issue with a military takeover, where military has taken over the political system. Why has that not happened in India? What makes the Indian military, prone, be... It's like, what makes the Indian military be not going that way? Is it just because of the political system that we have? Is it that the constitution prevents us to do that? Is it that there are certain ingrained principles within the Indian military that prevents the officers from doing that? So I've been really, keen to know that. So I'd like to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, I'm very happy that it has not happened in India that way. And no constitution ever allows a military takeover, whether it be Pakistan or Myanmar. And we are very fortunate that we have very well ingrained culture and the principles within the army. And also we have well established institutes outside the army, that is within the country. And so we abide by it. And I think largely that armies that were very motivated, well trained. And I think we stand by our traditions, our principles, and our value system. And there is no question of ever, because the governance is best left to the elected representatives of the people. They are the best people. You can see that wherever the military has taken over, it has been a disaster, largely been a disaster. So it's good to imbibe certain values from the defense forces, which they stand for. But the governance, political governance, be best left to the elected representative of the government. And I'm glad that has happened, and the army has, has got very rich traditions, which have stood by the organization.
Well, that's so nice to hear, sir. So one more thing, and before we go ahead, I know that you've been in the army for more than 40 years, and you've served the army for that long. I was just curious, what have been your and most experience, most favorable experiences, your best experiences in the military army?
Oh, there are many actually, and it's an organization, as they say, it is a lifestyle and not a job or an organization you're joining in. Once you join army, you wear the uniform of the army, you change and you remain affiliated and associated with lifelong, like we do now. And you make very good friends, lifelong friends. And, the professionalism you imbibe, I think, gives you a lot of pride and self-respect. And one of the best experiences has been in the United Nations when I was assigned to a part of the Africa. And there was civil turmoil there. And wherever there was a problem, it was very heartening to see that the chief military observers, who happened to be from a different country, they relied on Indians. Every time there was a problem, they would call for an Indian military officer that please sort out this problem or be in charge and do that. That's the kind of confidence the international community has over the Indian Army, and that speaks volumes about their professionalism and their devotion to the duty.
Wow. That's so, that's so comforting, and it's so, I'm filled with pride to hear that Indians are, specifically in the army and the military, are considered as somebody who can pacify so many issues that are going around the world. So that said, I'd also want to be talking to you about something which may sound a little controversial, but that's been in news. Recently, we had Mr. Rahul Gandhi talk about the Indian army, the Indian soldiers, and he said that Indian soldiers border par pit rahe hain. To which S. Jaishankar, our External Affairs Minister, remarked that this is unacceptable. And I know, I completely support by that. It's unacceptable. हमारे जवान शहीद होते हैं, हमारे जवान सोल्जर्स जो उनको हम रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी देते हैं हम लोग को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए, हम ये नहीं बोलते हैं कि वो मर गए हैं, वो शहीद होते हैं हमारे देश के लिए. बट ये शायद मेरे पर्सनल ओपिनियन होगा, बिकॉज आई एम अ foolish romantic that way when it comes to India, and probably that's why when we named our organization One Young India. But what is your opinion on it? You come from army, to hear something of this sort, where do you stand on this position?
Yeah, I definitely don't endorse that comment, and I think it's a loosely used word. Maybe he did not mean it, and he probably did not realize the implication of using a word like that. It doesn't happen. We are a very professional army, and we are well prepared for contingencies like this. So this is not a true allegation. And, having the experience of Galwan at the back of our mind, the Indian Army is well prepared, and I think taking all possible measures to see that we give a befitting reply to the Chinese. In fact, we have a very aggressive stance, and we want to make sure that nobody dares do such thing. So I don't think that's a correct observation. And as I said, maybe it's a loosely used word by him. And overall, I think the situation is quite, I would say, at the border. Situation is very, very stable, and Indian Army is fully in control of the things what are happening there.
Sir, do you think that the Indian politicians take the Indian Army for granted at times? Although we see Prime Minister Modi going and celebrating every Diwali with the Jawans at the border, and I'm sure that's sort of a boost. But other than that, do we see that the government takes the Indian military for granted?
Yeah, you see, firstly, the army, looks within the organization for motivation. And we fully realize that fundamentally we are fighting for the, as we say, that izzat or the honor of our own unit and organization. And eventually, I think if you are say faithful to your own organization, you'll be faithful to the country. And definitely that country comes uppermost, our constitution comes uppermost. And there are some politicians definitely who make loose statements, irresponsible statements. And I would say partly is because of the ignorance. Not all of them are aware how does the army function. They have not been exposed. So therefore, we ignore such comments, and it doesn't really affect the morale of most of the troops who, as I said, are looking at the organization itself or within its own hierarchy. There are enough reasons to feel motivated.
Yes, sir. But sir, there's also been an issue where we've seen, specifically in Haryana, that there has been protests about the Ahi regiment. And there is that regimentization within the Indian Army, Indian military, and I see sort of a politicization of Indian Army in that context. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, see, the regiments were caste-based regiments were created during the British time. This is a colonial era legacy which is carrying on. And as per the present policy, you are having mixed regiments, you know. Like gone are the days when British exploited us, in fact, I would say that, and we created a regiment based on the caste of the region. But now we are having mixed regiments. And post-independence, we've had no regiments purely based on caste which have been raised. So keeping in view the policy, I think creation of separate regiments based on caste is not likely. And we find now that each of the region, the people coming from different regions have a lot of strengths and which can be fully exploited when you have a mixed regiment coming up. And I think that is the best model we have found, and that is likely to be likely to continue in the coming season.
All right. So, it's really inspiring to hear from you. But I see, like, among my peers that a lot of people, specifically in the urban areas, don't join the army. And the aspiration to join army is very strong if I see in the rural areas, specifically as Jawans, as the entry level combatants, specifically when it comes to Indian Army. Why this contrast?
Yeah, I think you're right. This is the sort of peculiar sort of equation we face while recruiting. Now, as far as the officers are concerned, we have a mixed base drawing from urban as well as rural background. And largely the troops come from the rural background. And I think one of the major reasons why the defense services don't hold the same charm as a career option as some other sort of career options which are available to them. And primarily is because a lot more opportunities have arisen in the corporate sector. And the career in defense services is seen as something very tough. And it's partly because of, I would say, incomplete understanding of how things work there. Normally, people would see it as very tough postings, serving in difficult areas, extremely risky for life. They also don't like a very sort of a disciplined or regimented life. You have to, adhere to certain timings in terms of your routine. So, whereas contrast this with the life in the corporate, which is far more comfortable. It is far more paying than what it is in the army or within the defense services. But what they miss out is the quality of life which is offered outside within the defense forces. I mean, you are exposed to so many opportunities. You are exposed to highest quality of man management. You are dealing with people eventually who are prepared to lay their lives for you. So that is, I think, one of the most challenging assignments you can have in terms of managing people. Besides, you have a lot of opportunities in terms of exploiting your hobbies, talents, and skills. Virtually every other facility is available within the Army. The kind of exposure you get nationally and internationally, you get to travel around the country and the world and to see for yourself and learn a lot of things. So overall, I would say that it is a very, very rich, enriching experience, and enriching and very satisfying experience. But because of certain, I would say, misapprehensions, it does not hold the same kind of attraction as the other careers hold.
So I understand, like you said, that there is high risk, and the basic premise when we even invest is higher the risk, higher the return.
Yeah.
So don't you think that, I mean, at least I am of that opinion, and I could be wrong, I feel that army officials and those who are serving in the government, let's say an IPS officer, an IS officer, they need to be paid, they need to be among the highest paid officials in the country. Because I've heard somewhere, I don't know who said it, I don't know if it's a idiom or not, but we said that if you pay people in peanuts, you can only expect them to behave like monkeys.
Right.
And I completely, relate to that. But that said, I understand that the government of India has tried to also implement, and they have implemented the one rank, one pension recently when it comes to Indian Army. But when it comes to the pay gap in the private sector and what the government pays today, I feel there is a huge gap.
Yes.
Do you think that if something of that sort is done, that could resolve the situation, that could motivate more people to join the Indian Army, given that there's a prestige associated, and then I really look up to army professionals. Right? Whenever I'm going, whenever I see army professionals, and my daughter, for that matter, we've taught her to always say Jai Hind. I feel that there is an immense pride when it comes to protecting the nation, when it comes to serving the nation. If it's just that monetary terms that are preventing somebody from joining the army, don't you think that the government should do and make sure that the people in the army or the ones who are serving the government should be the highest paid officials in the country?
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that national security is of prime importance. And what drives the national security and what is essential for national security is, of course, having very professional defense forces. If that be so, obviously you have to make sure that they are most professional, you get the best talent needed by the defense forces to ensure the national security. Now, having said that, people join army, there are two, I would say, parts to the incentives which the defense forces offer. One could be the monetary package, and the other is the quality of life, which includes a large number of things. So, it is not, I would say, a commercial organization like the several corporates are, which are profit-driven essentially. So, you need someone who's dedicated, who's passionate for joining the defense services. Yet at the same time, you've got to make sure that they are suitably awarded monetarily to, remain motivated to do that. So I definitely feel that, yes, the monetary incentives should be good, should be attractive enough, for people to have defense forces as among the first few choices.
All right. Because I've been seeing this trend. I mean, we've seen this even with the Russia-Ukraine war and, a number of wars that have been, we call them proxy wars, that private armies, specifically the Wagner group, right? And not just the Wagner group, like you look at Blackwater and so on. So a number of these private armies, militaries which are coming up, and it's ex-army. I mean, I don't know how many
mercenaries.
Yes, mercenaries.
Yes.
So they've been joining private ranks. They're being paid handsomely well. And we see that not just in real life, but also in real life. Like if we see Avatar, the movies that have come out recently, the entire operations are being run by mercenaries. There is definitely this narrative, and it's happening, and then the reason being plausible deniability also. But when we see that happening, why not intervene, and why is that governments are hesitant to take that step?
Yeah, you see, you have large number of mercenary groups who, after their superannuation or after their innings with the defense forces, join organizations like this, which give you a lot of incentives and which carry out, mercenary assignments in a number of countries. Even in Afghanistan, we had a large number of them. So I think now a pertinent sort of issue here is that people in the defense forces retire very young. And once they retire, they have to be usefully employed. And you must have a very, very attractive scheme where these people, the talent and the skill they have acquired, they are extremely talented. They have some very, very useful skills which can be taken. So like you see in countries, the US and some of the Western countries, they are very usefully employed and they become a part of the corporate sector. Whereas it is not so in our country. Eventually they are left to find jobs on their own, and some of them, as you've seen, join the mercenary groups and do that. So it will be much better in case there is an organized sort of a process or a movement where their skills can be employed to the benefit of the country and also to the corporate world.
All right. So when you said that the benefits should also be, specifically when you mentioned the corporate world, I know that, for that matter, you and a lot of my friends who also retired from the army are now working within the corporate world. They share their expertise and they're paid handsomely well. And that gives them the motivation to work hard also. But at the same time, I've heard complaints that they do not get the same sort of respect. They do not get the same sort of, if I were to say and put it in the very crude terms, जिसको हम हिंदी में बोल देते हैं कि हमको इज्जत नहीं मिलती है हमारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर में, वो थोड़ा सा एक गैप फिर भी रह जाता है. So do you think that stays with an ex-army official in their heart somewhere that prevents them, or that stays in the mind somewhere that tells them that, what are we doing here?
Right. So the working environments are very different. The defense forces are very hierarchical, whereas they're very conscious about their rank and seniority, and it works well, and that is with a purpose, in the sense that you want absolutely implicit implementation of the instructions given by a senior to a junior. And that has a lot of pros and cons, a lot of disadvantages, advantages. And that is a specific requirement which is well suited to the defense forces. Whereas in the corporate world, the working environment is very, very different. And you've got to have communications laterally, vertically, very, very important. And I think what matters is the talent and skills, which is the foremost requirement there. So I would say it is a package which you have to adopt to. And, if that be environment, you've got to accept it. You've got to accept it. And the so-called izzat comes, or it is rather earned and not demanded. So if you are worth your talent and skill, you would get your respect. That is what I have to say.
All right. So you just mentioned, continuing forward from our conversation, it said, could you please share some light about the culture of Indian military? Like, what difference does it make, and how different is it to be an Indian military? Like, what's the culture that is imbibed when you say that I'm an Indian military officer? What values are imbibed in an Indian military officer that distinguishes them from, let's say, an army officer from any other country in the world?
Yeah, see, by and large, the values which are imparted to the, the defense services I would say across the globe it is the same, but it all depends on the level of professionalism you have. So we are a very professional army, and we have, imbibed our values. Some of the institutions are over 200 years old. So over a period of time, these values have been set. But since you asked me what are the values, see, from our training, that's the first step you take in the defense services or in the army. That is your training period. When you, from a raw college student, you come into the defense services, you are sent to a training institute where you undergo certain training. And I think the biggest values you would like to look at a potential officer is the devotion to the duty, truthfulness, and dedication to the organization. And the most important thing I would say is standing by your colleagues. That you have to have absolutely unflinching trust for your colleagues who can rely on you. And that is something which is valued very much. And obviously, we stand by our values, stand by our words. And these are the things which, I would say, things which are, inculcated during the training period. And over a period of time, I think it becomes a second habit. And that is why you find that when you come out of the army, as you said right in the beginning, you have a little bit of adjustment issues, because you learn to trust your colleague and your partners and others. What he says, you take him for his words, which at times becomes a little difficult when you come out and do it. So, because you're used to respecting these values. So, this is something which holds them in good stead throughout their career, I would say.
So, sir, do you also feel that there's a difference between somebody who joins the army as a pass out from IMA Dehradun, and then you obviously have NDA exams, right? So, the entry level is different. Like, somebody who's being trained from, I think IMA starts with grade 6.
Yeah.
Right? And then somebody who's been trained since they were that young to somebody who enters the army when they are maybe 18, 21, 24, 25, right? Do you see that there's a level of difference in their maturity and understanding of the institution, how they look at it, and how they want to perceive their career in the institution?
Yeah. See, the NDA entry is earlier, where you go after 10+2, and the IMA entry is after graduation. You go in a little later. But after having spent time in the NDA, you come to the IMA, and you have, a common training along with the direct entries. Okay, so both pass out together. Even the NDA cadets, after finishing their terms in NDA, they come to the IMA and they pass out together. So by and large, the value system is the same in both the countries, in both these sort of entry schemes. However, an officer coming through the NDA possibly had a little more grinding as he spent time in the NDA, 3 years extra, as compared to a direct entry who spent less time in the IMA. So that is the only difference. And when you come into the organization, it's the same. There is no distinction between whether one has come through a particular entry, and so both are treated the same, and expectations from all of them are the same.
All right. So now moving forward, since we are focused, like our organization One Young India is focused on continual learning, we endorse something called as learnacy, the ability to constantly learn, because literacy, we believe, is not so relevant today. Now, in the Indian context, right, you have the government schools, and you have private schools, and in the government schools also, you have the Indian military schools, like the army public schools. Do you think, and I'm sure that you have had the experience of interacting with students who are from the army public school or from, let's say, any other government school or private institution, You feel that there is a difference in the way they've been raised and the way they approach their education?
Yeah, you see, amongst the educational institutions, we have several category of schools. One is the scenic schools, okay, which were, essentially preparing students for their careers within the defense services. And scenic schools continue to thrive and continue to be subscribed. And the other educational institutions are the Army public schools or the Army schools, which are primarily managed by the Army for the wards of the Army personnel. Because, there are military units located at remote areas where they do not have good education facilities. So primarily these were created to provide education facilities to the wards of the Army personnel. So these are the Army schools or Army public schools which are run there. Now their curriculum and education is the same as you would find in any other school. Whereas the scenic schools still have some emphasis and they prepare you for entry into the NDA. And they also some emphasis on discipline training, which is quite aligned with the requirements in the defense services. And both have their usefulness and they continue to be prescribed. The Army schools also, some of the Army schools are doing very well. They're competing with the best schools outside, and they continue to serve the basic requirements of the defense services.
All right. So if you were to suggest some changes in the Indian education system, right? I know you've spoken to a lot of our students before, and you've said that, continuously learning and understanding the world that's changing around you is necessary. But unfortunately, not a lot of students have that experience, specifically when it comes to the Indian context, barring maybe, the very elite who are able to afford that sort of an education. But right now, we definitely have access to internet. What would you suggest that how can the Indian youth make themselves more relevant today? What aspirations do you have for the Indian youth when it comes to education, and what changes would you want them to adapt to?
Right. See, we've just in the process of implementing the new education policy, which is coming to wake. And if you look at it in detail, or examine it, you find that the emphasis is shifting from merely academic learning or learning through rote or learning in a limited sort of a sphere to a more broad-based learning. The essential requirement is that your mind should be triggered by a lot of, I would say, learning processes, which should not be confined to only the, I would say, the prescribed academic books. And I would say more emphasis has to be on experiential learning, which is of course the best form of learning. And because human mind has huge potential, immense potential. And I think we can never tap the entire potential. The emphasis has to be on experiential learning, where you give wide exposure and you also let the mind, learn things through, interacting with the various experiences they have. That's what I feel about that.
All right, sir. So there's also one thing that I wanted to probably ask you about. We've recently seen that there are n number of artificial intelligence softwares that are coming up. There are tools that are coming up. For example, recently OpenAI we made a beta program open for ChatGPT, which essentially eliminates your basic copywriting, basic coding. If not eliminates it, at least makes them redundant, right? At the same time, there is automation. There's robotics. We see that there are companies like Boston Robotics who are making, very crazy robots that you can do n number of manual work. And then we also see that there is a case in question right now in development where we're seeing robots being used as army personnel, as somebody who are combatant ready. Do you think that we can use robots in combat?
I don't think that a robot will ever be able to replace a human being because whatever be the sophistication level of machine you're using, eventually the man behind the machine who matters. So we have increasing sophistication within the army. We're using very, very sophisticated. Now, of course, AI is also one of the major thrusts in that. But eventually, it is the decision maker would be the human being who has to be a master, who has to understand different technology which are available. And he's the one who's got to, I think a human brain is the finest example of, I think, a sophistication. So I don't think, and especially, within the army, where situations are dynamic at times. I mean, you may have n number of permutation combinations, I would say structured, but you would have n+1 or you would have a different situation, which only a human mind can do that. So not to undermine the capability of the technology and the machines, because these are the best enablers. I mean, and they give you a lot of, I would say, inputs, but eventually it has to be processed by the human mind and decision has to be taken by that. That's what I feel.
No, I see where you're coming from. Because I watched this movie called as American Sniper. And, it was really very interesting to see what goes on in the mind of, if an officer who's making a decision whether to pull the trigger or not.
Right.
So obviously that decision cannot be made, solely by an artificial intelligence entity per se. But do you think that making such decisions at times have a traumatic effect on the individual who's taking such a decision? Because
see, eventually, if you are making a decision, you're responsible for it as a commander, and a lot of lives depend on what you decide. And if you take a wrong decision, it can have catastrophic effect. Definitely, it'll be a setback. But then it's part of your training, and it's part of your training to take a balanced and a considered decision under stress, because situations are always difficult during the battle or the war, and you would be required to take a decision under stressful conditions. So you are trained for that, and if you are well trained and apply your mind, normally you would take decision for the best interest of the organization and the country. So I think that is the spirit with which all decisions are normally taken.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, sir. But sir, there's another one thing that's been happening in the world that we're living in today with the Russia-Ukraine war that we're seeing. And also there are a number of countries which had this necessary conscription. And there are people who don't want to join the army, but then they are sort of forced to serve the army. Even though they are trained, or they may be trained during that point, they don't have the heart into it. Where do you think, do you think that's helpful in any way? Do you think that we should have people serving in the army even if they don't want to? Do you think it's helpful in any way? Other than obviously, I feel that it may be helpful to the person who's going through that experience, and it may definitely help somebody. But other than that, do you think that it has some negative connotations or whatever positive things that it can contribute to?
If you recall, in the beginning, I said one of the primary requirements should be for someone wanting to join the defense services that he should be motivated, inspired to join the defense services. He should have a passion for it. That is the primary requirement, and he will do well. He will not be a square peg in a round hole, creating problem for the organization as well as for the self. So I feel that is the basic rule or the basic principle we must apply. Now, as regard to conscription has not worked anywhere. If you recall, the American Army used to be based on conscription. They went into Vietnam War and they had a terrible setback, and they then reverted to a volunteer basis of recruitment. And they've been a very, very professional army, committed all over the globe, and they're doing very well. On the other hand, you see the Russians and the Chinese have a system of conscription. And unfortunately, they have not performed very well. Firstly, as I said, that you have an unwilling soldier who does not align himself with the cause, the cause why he's fighting or why is he here. So it leads to a lot of frustration, it leads to a lot of loss of synergy within the organization. And that is what is being experienced in the current conflict in Russia and Ukraine. You see that a lot of new recruits who had joined as a part of conscript, they've had large number of casualties, and the Russian army is not acquitted itself very well. Same is true of the China. And there are a lot of conscripts who've been sent there, willing or unwilling, and obviously when their heart and mind is not there in the organization or for the cause for which they are fighting, their performance is not the best. Fortunately for us, we don't have a situation where we have the dearth of volunteers wanting to join the army. Voluntary recruitment is the best form of recruitment for the army. So we have a large number of young people who want to join, and you have a wide base from which to select from. Unfortunately, as we discussed earlier, we have a slight problem of, defense services not being the best option. But that has not forced us to lower our standards, in terms of recruitment or the number of young people who want that. So I would feel that conscription is not the right thing for us, and it should not be adopted.
All right. So, sir, one more thing that has been, in my mind, I thought I'd also ask you that. So, the Modi government, the BJP government has been in power since 2014. And a lot of people say that India's stature when it comes to international politics has strengthened over the last 8 years now. 8.5 odd years. Where do you think, how true is it?
Yeah, if we see the image of India, the past, I would say 7 or 8 years you're talking about, we have done quite well in terms of diplomacy, in terms of foreign policy. Definitely, India is now recognized as a major emerging power. We are valued in terms of, friendship, in terms of bilateral relationship, in terms of economic alliances. And also, it happens to be the year when India has assumed the presidency of G20. It also assumed the presidency of SCO, Shanghai Cooperating Organization. So India also happens to be the, in the Security Council, UNSC, a member of the UNSC in the current assignment we're going through. So it's a good year for India. It is at the driver's seat where we can, drive the agenda, what we wish to, as a president of the G20. So overall, I would feel that the image of India has gone up, definitely. We have been far more proactive in, in terms of foreign policy. And I think as an Indian, we can definitely feel proud when we go abroad, travel outside. Our stock has gone up internationally, I would say so.
All right. Sir, when you say that, when we have the Indians being represented internationally right now when it comes to international politics, we also have at the same time number of people who are living abroad and don't consider India to be in the best light. And we see a number of instances on social media where you have people living across, other than India, and they're criticizing India for its policies, for things that are happening. Do you think they're justified in doing so?
Well, firstly, I feel that everybody is entitled to his or her own views, what they think about. And people have diverse views. Why? Even in India, people have different views. There is a large section which is critical of the policies of the government, whether it's government A or B. So it's good to have a divergent view or an opposite view, because that gives you, to examine your sort of policies and views. And if there is some merit, you can always, correct course. So similarly, people settle abroad. They may have motivated interest. They may have vested interest, definitely. And you have to see that we should remain on course. What we feel right, we must stick to it. I don't think the criticism for opposite views should sort of bother us as much to divest from our stated policies.
Right. Okay. So, we were discussing about United Nations, and you've served in the United Nations. At the same time, we also discussed that India is going to become the largest population in the world. Do you think it's time for India to have a permanent place in the United Nations Security Council?
Yes, most definitely. India has a very strong case for coming on the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member. And that has been a demand of India and so-called G4 grouping, which includes Germany, which also includes Japan. Okay, so G4 countries have been demanding a permanent place. See, United Nations was conceived after the Second World War and sort of established after the Second World War. The reality has changed in the last, I would say, 70 to 80 years. Okay. Now, economically, even otherwise, when you see, the large number of countries have developed. India is now one of the major economies of the world. We are the 5th largest. Besides the economic potential, United Nations has to be a representative of the world, a true reflection of the world, and which means that different parts of the world must be represented in the UNSC. So India definitely deserves a place in the United Nations, and it has been demanding that. And it also wants other reforms to be instituted in the United Nations, so that it becomes an organization which truly reflects the entire globe.
So do you see that happening in the next year?
It can't be. See, it is being delayed. I don't think it can be prevented. There is immense pressure, and the current permanent members are seized of the requirement. There will be opposition to it, primarily from our adversaries who may not support it. But it's a long battle which has to be continued and won by India. And I see that happening sooner than later.
All right. So, sir, I think, I know there's so much else to talk about also. But since this conversation was the first one that we have had for the entire One Young India community, and we wanted to keep it limited to the military army domain, broadly the army domain, and I've only spoken to you about your domain here, and that too also not so much. But before we part ways, I would want to request you to share an advice that you would want to give to young Indians as to what they can do to make themselves relevant in today's 21st century, the knowledge economy, the ever-changing artificial intelligence, brave new world that we're heading into. So, your words of wisdom for One Young Indians.
Yeah, definitely, if I have to say something and suggest something, I would say that we are definitely very proud to be an Indian, and particularly at this time in the global turmoil, where India has emerged as one of the shining examples of very, very stable economies, which has not been so badly affected. And we would pass this test very, very successfully. I would also say that this is a time of great opportunities, great innovations, encashment of new ideas if you have. And this is the best time when the Indian economy is looking to catapult into the next stage. You know that there are government ambitions to quickly turn into a 5 trillion economy and eventually into a 10 trillion economy. That will happen sooner than later, I have no doubts in it. And I think this is the right kind of background and the opportunity which young people have, and they must allow their talent and skills to grow and exploit the current environment, which is entirely in the favor of India at this point of time.
All right. So that's so nice to hear coming from somebody who is a veteran in the Indian Army and who has served so long. It gives me a sense of comfort to know that India is heading in the right direction. And to have people like you to guide India and young Indians, wherever we are going wrong, to give us that nudge in the right direction. So that said, I am sure that we are going to be asking a lot more of your time in the future. We have so much to discuss, so much to learn from experts like yourselves. And we would be honored to have more of your time for our community and share your words of wisdom. But that does not stop us at any point to learn from anyone, right? You've been in the Indian Army for so long, and even right now, you are somebody I feel who is constantly updating themselves. As somebody who is a lifelong learner, and you are, I feel, the true embodiment of that, why do you think it's necessary that young people today should embrace learning continuously? And if there is just one thing that you can tell them to motivate them to continuously learn, and what difference would it make to their career?
Yeah, we are in a knowledge economy without doubt, and if you have the talent and the skills, the place where you are, it does not matter. It has become irrelevant now. If you are an epitome of knowledge and skills, you can, build a career anywhere. And as I said, this is the best time to do that. In any case, learning is a never-ending process. And, I have seen people, even at my stage, open to learning. You have so many avenues available today for learning. You have the, a large number of courses on the open source education which is available. So it always adds to your value. It adds to your weight. And I think it will always give you a tremendous sense of satisfaction. So I feel that learning should be a never-ending process. Should keep your mind open and always look at an opportunity where you can imbibe something more and add, to your repertoire of the knowledge which you already have. Thank you.
All right. So, Namaskar, sir. Thank you so much for your time. We would definitely be counting on you again for your time. And thank you so much again for the knowledge that you've shared with us. I really hope that our community has something that they've learned from you. And I'm sure that a lot of people from our community would want to reach out to you. We would make sure that the ones who really have some genuine questions or concerns are able to ask you those sorts of questions, and we redirect them to you if your time permits.
Yeah. It will always be a pleasure. And it's very, very exciting to interact with the young people. And I'll be very happy to be of any use to you at all. Most open about it. And if there are any follow-up, you're most welcome.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.